Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now when it was 637th night, Shahrazad continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Sa'adan, having broken into the palace of King Jamak, and pounded to pieces those therein, the survivors cried out, Quarter! Quarter! And Sa'adan said to them, Pinion your king. So they bound Jamak and took him up, and Sa'adan drove them before him like sheep, and brought them to Gharib's presence, after the most part of the citizens had perished by the enemy's swords. When the king of Babel came to himself, he found himself bound, and heard Sa'adan saying, I will sup tonight off this King Jamak. Whereupon he turned to Gharib and cried to him, I throw myself at thy mercy. Replied Gharib, Become a Moslem, and thou shalt be safe from the ghoul, and from the vengeance of the living one who ceaseth not. So Jamak professed al-Islam with heart and tongue, and Gharib bade loose his bonds. Then he expounded the faith to his people, and they all became true believers. After which Jamak returned to the city, and dispatched thence provant and henchmen to Gharib, and wined the camp before Babel, where they passed the night. On the morrow, Gharib gave the signal for the march, and they fared on till they came to Mayafarikan, which they found empty, for its people had heard what had befallen Babel, and had fled to Kufa city, and told Ajib. When he heard the news, his doomsday appeared to him, and he assembled his braves, and informed them of the enemy's approach, ordered them make ready to do battle with his brother's host. After which he numbered them, and found them 30,000 horse, and 10,000 foot. So, needing more, he levied other 50,000 men, cavalry and infantry, and taking horse, amid a mighty host, rode forwards till he came upon his brother's army, encamped before Mosul, and pitched his tents in face of their lines. Then Gharib wrote a writ, and said to his officers, Which of you will carry this letter to Ajib? Whereupon Sahim sprang to his feet and cried, O king of the age, I will bear thy missive, and bring thee back an answer. So Gharib gave him the epistle, and he repaired to the pavilion of Ajib, who, when informed of his coming, said, Admit him. And when he stood in the presence, asked him, Whence comest thou? Answered Sahim, From the king of the Arabs and the Persians, son-in-law of the Khosrow king of the world, who sendeth thee a writ. So do thou return him a reply. Quoth Ajib, Give me the letter. Accordingly, Sahim gave it to him, and he tore it open and found therein, In the name of Allah, the compassionating, the compassionate, peace on Abraham the friend await. But afterwards, as soon as this letter shall come to thy hand, do thou confess the unity of the bounty, king, causer of causes, and mover of the clouds, and leave worshipping idols. And thou do this thing, thou art my brother, and ruler over us, and I will pardon thee the deaths of my father and mother, nor will I reproach thee with what thou hast done. But an thou obey not my bidding, behold, I will hasten to thee, and cut off thy head, and lay waste thy dominions. Verily I give thee good counsel, and the peace be on those who pace the path of salvation, and obey the Most High King. When Ajib read these words, and knew the threat they contained, his eyes sank into the crown of his head, and he gnashed his teeth, and flew into a furious rage. Then he tore the letter into pieces, and threw it away, which vexed Sahim, and he cried out upon Ajib, saying, Allah, whither thy hand for the deed thou hast done? With this, Ajib cried out to his men, saying, Seize yonder hound, and hew in pieces with your hangers. So they ran at Sahim, but he bared blade, and he fell upon them, and slew of them more than 50 braves. After which he cut his way through, bathed in blood, and won back to Gharib, who said, What is the cause of this, O Sahim? And he told him what had passed, whereat he grew livid for rage, and crying, Aloha Akbar! God is most great, bade the battle drums beat. So the fighting men donned their hauberks and coats of straight-woven mail, and baldricked themselves with their swords. The footmen drew out in battle array, whilst the horsemen mounted their prancing horses and dancing camels, and levied their long lances, and the champions rushed into the field. Ajib and his men also took horse, and host charged down upon host. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 638th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Gharib and his merry men took horse, Ajib and his troops also mounted, and host charged down upon host. Then ruled the Kazi of battle, in whose ordinance is no wrong, for a seal is on his lips, and he speaketh not. And the blood railed in rills, and purfled earth with curious embroidery. Heads grew grey, and hotter waxed battle and fiercer. Feet slipped, and stood firm the valiant, and pushed forwards whilst turned the faint heart, and fled, nor did they leave fighting till the day darkened, and the night starkened. Then clashed the cymbals of retreat, and the two hosts drew apart, each from the other, and returned to their tents where they nighted. Next morning, as soon as it was day, the cymbals beat to battle and daring do, and the warriors donned their harnesses of fight, and baldricked their blades the brightest bright, and with the brown lance bedight mounted doughty steed every knight, and cried out, saying, This day no flight. And the two hosts drew out in battle array like the surging sea. The first to open the chapter of war was Sahim, who drave his destrier between the two lines, and played with swords and spears, and turned over all the capitula of combat, till men of choicest wits were confounded. Then he cried out, saying, Who is for fighting? Who is for jousting? Let no sluggard come out, or weakling. Whereupon there rushed at him a horseman of the Kafirs, as he were a flame of fire. But Sahim let him not stand long before him ere he overthrew him with a thrust. Then a second came forth, and he slew him also, and a third, and he tare him in twain, and a fourth, and he did him to death. Nor did they cease sallying out to him, and he left not slaying them till it was noon, by which time he had laid low 200 braves. Then Ajib cried to his men, Charge once more. And sturdy host on sturdy host down bore, and great was the clash of arms and battle roar. The shining swords outrang, the blood in the streams ran, and footmen rushed upon footmen. Death showed in van, and horsehoof was shodden with skull of man. Nor did they cease from swords smiting till waned the day, and the night came on in black array, and they drew apart, and returned to their tents, and passed the night there. As soon as morning morrowed, the two hosts mounted, and sought the field of fight, and the Moslems looked for Gharib to back steed and ride under the standards, as was his wont, but he came not. So Sahim sent to his brother's pavilion a slave, who, finding him not, asked the tent pitchers, but they answered, We know not of him. Whereat he was greatly concerned, and went forth and told the troops, who refrained from battle, saying, And Gharib be absent, his foe will destroy us. Now there was for Gharib's absence a cause, strange but true, which we will set out in order due. And it was thus. When Ajib returned to his camp on the preceding night, he called one of his guardsmen by name, Sayyar, and said to him, O Sayyar, I have not treasured thee save for the day like this, and now I bid thee enter among Gharib's host, and pushing into the marquee of their lord, bring him hither to me, and prove how wily and cunning thou be. And Sahir said, I hear, and I obey. So we repaired to the enemy's camp, and stealing into Gharib's pavilion under the darkness of night, when all the men had gone to their places of rest, stood up, as though he were a slave to serve Gharib, who presently, being athirst, called to him for water. So he brought him a pitcher of water, drugged with bang, and Gharib could not fulfill his need ere he fell down with his head distancing his heels, whereupon Sayyar wrapped him in his cloak, and carried him to Ajib's tent, and threw him down at his feet. Quoth Ajib, O Sayyar, what is this? Quoth he, This be thy brother Gharib. Whereat Ajib rejoiced and said, The blessings of the idols light upon thee. Loose him and wake him. So they made him sniff up vinegar, and he came to himself, and he opened his eyes. Then finding himself bound, and in a tent other than his own, exclaimed, There is no majesty, and there is no might, save in Allah, the glorious, the great. Thereupon Ajib cried out to him, saying, Dost thou draw on me, O dog, and seek to slay me, and take on me thy blood wreck of thy father and thy mother? I will send thee this very day to them, and rid the world of thee. Replied Gharib, Kaffir hound, soon shalt thou see against whom the wheels of fate shall revolve, and who shall be overthrown by the wrath of the Almighty King, who wotteth what is in hearts, and who shall leave thee in Gehenna tormented and confounded. Have ruth on thyself, and say with me, There is no God but the God, and Abraham is the friend of God. When Ajib heard Gharib's words, he snarked, and he snorted, and he railed at his god, the stone, and called for the sworder and the leather rug of blood. But his vizier, who was at heart a Moslem, though outwardly a miscreant, rose and kissing the ground before him, said, Patience, O king, deal not hastily, but wait till we know the conquered from the conqueror. If we prove the victors, we shall have power to kill him, and if we be beaten, his being alive in our hands will be a strength to us. And the emir said, The minister speaketh sooth. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 639th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Ajib proposed to slay Gharib, the wazir rose and said, Deal not hastily, for we have always the power to kill him. So Ajib bade lay his brother Gharib in irons, and chained him up in his own tent, and sent 1,000 stout warriors to guard him. Meanwhile, Gharib's host, when they awoke that morning and found not their king, were as sheep sans a shepherd. But Sidon the gull cried out of them, saying, O folk, don your war gear, and trust to your Lord to defend you. So Arabs and Ajams mounted horses, after clothing themselves in hauberks of iron, and shirting themselves in straight-knit mail, and sallied forth to the field, the chiefs and the colours moving in van. Then dashed out the ghoul of the mountain with a club on his shoulder, 200 pounds in weight, and wheeled and careered, saying, Ho, worshippers of idols, come ye out and renown it this day, for 'tis a day of onslaught. Whoso knoweth me hath enough of my mischief, and whoso knoweth me not, I will make myself known to thee. I am Sidon, servant of King Gharib, who is for jousting, who is for fighting. Let no faint heart come forth to me today, or weakling. And there rushed upon him a champion of the infidels, as he were a flame of fire, and drove at him. But Sidon charged home at him, and dealt him with his club a blow which broke his ribs, and cast him lifeless to the earth. Then he called out to his sons and slaves, saying, Light the bonfire, and whoso falleth of the Kafirs, do ye dress them, and roast them well in the flame. Then bring him to me, that I may break my fast on him. So they kindled a fire midmost the plain, and laid thereupon the slain, till he was cooked. And when they brought him to Sidon, who gnawed his flesh, and crunched his bones, when the miscreants saw the mountain ghoul do this, indeed they were affrighted, and sore affright. But Ajib cried out to his men, saying, Out on you! Fall upon the ogre, and hew him in hunks with your scimitars. So 20,000 men ran at Sidon, whilst the footmen circled round him, and rained upon him darts and shafts, that he was wounded in 24 places, and his blood ran down upon the earth, and he was alone. Then the host of the Moslems drave at the heatheny, calling for help upon the Lord of the 3 worlds, and they ceased not from fight and fray till the day came to an end, when they drew apart. But the infidels had captured Sidon, as he were a drunken man for loss of blood, and they bound him fast, and set him by Gharib, who, seeing the ghoul a prisoner, said, There is no majesty, and there is no might, save in Allah, the glorious, the great. O Sidon, what case is this? O my lord, replied Sidon, it is Allah, extolled and exalted be he, who ordaineth joy and annoy, and there is no help but this, and that betide. And Gharib rejoined, Thou speakest sooth, O Sadan. But Ajib passed the night in joy, and he said to his men, Mount ye on the morrow, and fall upon the Moslems, so shall not one of them be left alive. And they replied, Hearkening and obedience. This is how it fared with them. But as regards to the Moslems, they passed the night dejected, and weeping for their king and Sadan. But Sahim said to them, O folk, be not concerned, for the aidance of Almighty Allah is nigh. Then he waited till midnight, when he assumed the garb of a tent pitcher, and repairing to Ajib's camp, made his way between the tents and pavilions, till he came to the king's marquee, where he saw him seated on his throne, surrounded by his princes. So he entered, and going up to the candles which burnt in the tent, snuffed them, and sprinkled levigated henbane on the wicks. After which he withdrew, and waited without the marquee till the smoke of the burning henbane reached Ajib and his princes, and they fell to the ground like dead men. Then he left them, and went to the prison tent, where he found Gharib and Sadan guarded by 1,000 braves, who were overcome with sleep. So he cried out at the guards, saying, Woe to you! Sleep not, but watch your prisoners and light the cressets. Presently he filled a cresset with firewood, on which he strewed henbane, and lighting it, went round about the tent with it, till the smoke entered the nostrils of the guards, and they all fell asleep, drowned by the drug. When he entered the tent, and finding Gharib and Sadan also insensible, he aroused them by making them smell and sniff at a sponge full of vinegar that he had made and brought with him. Thereupon he loosed their bonds and collars, and when they saw him, they blessed him and rejoiced in him. After this they went forth and took all the arms of the guards, and Sahim said to them, Go to your own camp, while he re-entered Ajib's pavilion, and wrapping him in his cloak, lifted him up, and made for the Moslem encampment. And the Lord of the Compassionate protected him, so that he reached Gharib's tent in safety, and unrolled the cloak before him. Gharib looked at its contents, and seeing his brother Ajib bound, cried out, Aloha Akbar, God is most great, aidance, victory. And he blessed Sahim, and bade him arouse Ajib. So he made him smell the vinegar mixed with incense, and he opened his eyes, and finding himself bound and shackled, hung down his head earthwards. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 640th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that after Sahim had aroused Ajib, whom he made insensible with henbane, and had brought him to his brother Gharib, the captive opened his eyes, and feeling himself bound and shackled, hung down his head earthwards. Thereupon cried Sahim, O accursed, lift thy head. So he raised his eyes, and found himself amongst Arabs and Ajims, and saw his brother seated on the throne of his estate, and the place of his power. Wherefore he was silent, and spake not. Then Gharib cried out, and said, Strip me this hound. So they stripped him, and came down upon him with whips, till they weakened his body, and subdued his pride. After which Gharib set over him a guard of 100 knights. And when this fraternal correction had been administered, they heard shouts of, There is no God but the God, and God is most great, from the camp of the Kafirs. Now the cause of this was that 10 days after his nephew King Al-Damah, Gharib's uncle had sent out from Al-Jazira with 20,000 horse, and on nearing the field of battle had dispatched one of his scouts to get news. The man was absent a whole day, at the end of which time he returned and told Al-Damah all that had happened to Gharib and his brothers. So he waited till the night, when he fell upon the infidels, crying out, Aloha Akbar, and put them to the edge of the biting scimitar. When Gharib heard the Tagbir, he said to Sahim, Go find out the cause of these shouts and war cries. So Sahim repaired to the field of battle, and questioned the slaves and camp followers, who told him that King Al-Damah had come up with 20,000 men, and had fallen upon the idolaters by night, saying, "By the virtue of Abraham the friend, I will not forsake my brother's son, but I will play a brave man's part and beat back the host of miscreants and please the omnipotent king." So Sahim returned and told his uncle's daring do to Gharib, who cried out to his men, saying, "Don your arms and mount your steeds, and let us succor my father's brother." So they took the horse and fell upon the infidels and put them to the edge of the sharp sword. By the morning they had killed nigh 50,000 of the Kafirs and made over 30,000 prisoners, and the rest of Ajib's army dispersed over the length and breadth of the earth. Then the Moslems returned in victory and triumph, and Gharib rode out to meet his uncle, whom he saluted and thanked for his help. Quoth Al-Damai, "I wonder if that dog Ajib fell in this day's affair." Quoth Gharib, "O uncle, be of good cheer, and keep thine eyes cool and clear. Know that he is with me in chains." When Al-Damai heard this, he rejoiced with exceeding joy, and the two kings dismounted and entered the pavilion, but found no Ajib there. Whereupon Gharib exclaimed, "Oh, glory of Abraham the friend, with whom be peace," and adding, "Alas, what an ill end is this to a glorious day!" And he cried out to the tent pitchers, saying, "Woe to you! Where is my enemy who oweth me so much?" Quoth they, "When thou mountest and we went with thee, thou didst not bid us to guard him." And Gharib exclaimed, "There is no majesty, and there is no might save in Allah, the glorious, the great." But Al-Damai said to him, "Hasten not, nor be concerned, for where can he go, and we in pursuit of him?" Now the manner of Ajib's escape was in this wise. His page, Sayyar, had been ambushed in the camp, and when he saw Gharib mount and ride forth, leaving none to guard his enemy Ajib, he could hardly credit his eyes. So he waited a while, and presently crept to the tent, and taking Ajib, who was senseless for the pain of the bastinado on his back, made off with him into the open country, and fared on at the top of his speed from early night to the next day, till he came to a spring of water under an apple tree. Then he sat down Ajib from his back and washed his face, whereupon he opened his eyes, and seeing Sayyar, said to him, "Oh, Sayyar, carry me to Kufa, that I may recover there, and levy horsemen and soldiers wherewith to overthrow my foe, and know, O Sayyar, that I am anhungered." So Sayyar sprang up, and going out to the desert, caught an ostrich pullet, and brought it to his lord. Then they gathered fuel, and deftly used the fire sticks, kindled a fire, by which he roasted the bird which he had halt, and fed Ajib with its flesh, and gave him to drink of the water of the spring, till his strength returned to him. After which he went to one of the Badwai tribal encampments, and stealing thence a steed, mounted Ajib upon it, and journeyed on with him for many days, till they drew near the city of Kufa. The viceroy of the capital came out to meet and salute the king, whom he found weak with the beating his brother had inflicted upon him. And Ajib entered the city and called his physicians. When they answered his summons, he bade them heal him in less than 10 days' time. And they said, "We hear, and we obey." And they tended him till he became whole of the sickness that was upon him and of the punishment. Then he commanded his viziers to write letters to all his nabobs and vassals, and he indicted 21 writs and dispatched them to the governors, who assembled their troops and set out for Kufa by forced marches. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. And so do I cease the telling of my tale for today, until it be morrow.